Hello and welcome to a story that will shatter your understanding of courage and chaos. Today we delve into the icy dawn of December the 22nd, 1944, when a tiny Belgian town named Bastogne faced a dire ultimatum from the German forces: surrender or face annihilation. But what if I told you that beneath this frozen standoff, a daring promise was being made, one that could change the course of history? Imagine 18,000 American soldiers trapped within a ring of 30,000 Germans, their supplies cut off, their air support grounded by a brutal winter. Could hope survive such bleak odds? How did a single American general, George S. Patton, pledge to defy all logic and move an entire army across treacherous, snow-covered terrain at a speed never before seen in warfare? And what secrets lay behind Hitler's last desperate gamble: a massive, silent, midnight assembly of 410,000 German troops with nearly 1,500 tanks, ready to unleash chaos at the Battle of the Bulge? Was this the final act of a crumbling empire, or a cunning trap that would ensnare the Allies? Could inexperienced American soldiers, thrown into the chaos of a surprise attack, hold their ground against a meticulously coordinated German assault, aiming to seize a crucial crossroads in just 48 hours? And what was the true significance of the roads leading to Antwerp, a port city vital for the entire German campaign? All of these fragments, one question: will the daring maneuvers and desperate battles of this winter clash rewrite the history we think we know? Or will they vanish into the icy silence of defeat? In this video, we will trace the path from chaos to strategy, from despair to daring, separating fact from fiction, and revealing the shocking truth behind one of the most pivotal moments in World War II. The story begins right now as we step into the frozen heart of the Battle of Bastogne. On the cold morning of December the 22nd in the year of 1944, at precisely 11:30 a.m., the small town of Bastogne, nestled in Belgium, was shrouded in a thick layer of icy air that hung heavy and visible in the frigid atmosphere. The breath of soldiers and civilians alike formed fleeting clouds as Lieutenant Colonel Harry Card stood watchfully on the outskirts, observing the approach of 4 German officers. These officers advanced through the snowy, battered landscape, their figures stark against the remnants of destruction that marred the terrain. They bore a white flag, a simple yet striking symbol of surrender, its stark whiteness contrasting sharply with the devastated surroundings. In their hands, they carried a message of significant consequence, a demand for the town's capitulation, couched in a tone brimming with confident mockery and a presumptive air of assured victory. This moment signified more than a mere confrontation. It was a pivotal point where the course of the war itself seemed poised to shift. The tide of conflict was turning. For the troops of the United States stationed in and around Bastogne, the situation had become dire. They found themselves surrounded by formidable German armored units, a circumscribed pocket from which escape or reinforcement seemed impossible. The only viable option to avert total destruction was an honorable surrender, an acknowledgement of defeat dictated by the desperate circumstances. The German officers, exuding supreme confidence, waited quietly, aware of their dominance in that moment. Their assurance was justified. Inside the encircled perimeter, 18,000 American soldiers were trapped, hemmed in by approximately 30,000 German troops armed with hundreds of tanks and heavy artillery. No supplies could penetrate the German blockade, and the weather had grounded all Allied aircraft, cutting off vital air support. The nearest Allied relief forces were over 100 miles away, immobilized by the brutal winter weather. Unbeknownst to these encircled American soldiers and their German captors, far to the south, history was preparing to be rewritten through a bold promise made by one extraordinary American general. General George S. Patton had recently issued an audacious pledge, so daring that even the cautious and seasoned Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, initially doubted its seriousness. Patton vowed to move his entire army across the treacherous winter landscape at a speed never before achieved in warfare, an unprecedented maneuver designed to break the German encirclement and deliver relief where it seemed impossible. The very mathematics of war, which typically favored numerical superiority and technological edge, were on the cusp of being challenged, not through brute force alone, but through strategic audacity, unshakable American resolve, and the sheer willingness of a leader to defy what others considered impossible. This turning point had begun 6 days earlier, in the icy pre-dawn hours of December 16, when the dawn had barely begun to break. At exactly 5:30 in the morning, the serenity of the Ardennes forest shattered as an unprecedented barrage erupted along an 80-mile front. An overwhelming artillery assault, comprising 1,850 artillery pieces, opened fire simultaneously, their shells slicing through the crisp winter air toward American positions, unsuspecting and unprepared for such ferocity. Among those caught in the chaos was Private First Class Robert Leakey of the 99th Infantry Division, who would later record in his diary the violence he witnessed. The earth trembled beneath us. Trees erupted into splinters as if torn apart by unseen hands. The very air itself seemed to scream with fury. We had been told the Germans were finished, defeated, broken, yet here we stood, wrong in our assumptions. This operation, known as Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, was Hitler's last desperate gamble to turn the tide of war in his favor. The Germans had clandestinely assembled an enormous force, 410,000 troops, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and over 2,600 artillery pieces. They moved this colossal armament through the dense, shadowed Eiffel forests during night hours, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection, even employing horses to carry supplies and avoid noisy engines. General Major Heinz Kokott, commanding the 51st Volksgrenadier Division, vividly remembered the critical moment immediately prior to the attack. In the darkness, his soldiers stood silently, their breath forming ghostly clouds as they prepared for battle. They understood the stakes. This wasn't merely another offensive. It was their last desperate chance to turn the tide and perhaps alter the outcome of the entire conflict. Their carefully coordinated assault targeted the most vulnerable point in the Allied defensive line, where 4 American divisions, stretched thin and deployed across challenging terrain, were most susceptible. Many of the American soldiers involved in this confrontation were relatively inexperienced in combat, having been thrust into the brutal reality of war with minimal preparation. Yet they stood firm against the overwhelming German onslaught, united by a shared sense of urgency and resilience. During the intense and often brutal battles emerging in the aftermath of previous engagements, the German forces managed to execute a masterstroke of military deception and surprise, catching their enemies off guard in a manner that was both swift and astonishing. Their enemies, the American units, found themselves quickly overwhelmed, some units either being driven back in disarray or retreating in a state of chaos and confusion that made organized resistance almost impossible. Central to the Germans' approach was the critical element of rapid movement. Speed was not just a tactical preference, but a fundamental requirement that could determine the outcome of the entire campaign. Their goal was to seize control of a crucial transportation hub, the road junction at Bastogne, within an unforgiving 48-hour window. This intersection was of paramount importance because it served as a convergence point for no fewer than 7 major roads, which were vital arteries for the movement of armies, supplies, and equipment. These roads were essential pathways that German tanks and mechanized units relied upon to reach their primary objective. The port city of Antwerp, an important logistical hub approximately 125 miles away. Without securing Bastogne quickly, the Germans knew their entire offensive might grind to a halt, losing momentum before it even had a chance to fully develop. The task of capturing Bastogne was entrusted to General Dupant's Truppen Hinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz, who commanded the formidable 47th Panzer Corps. This elite force was well-equipped and highly prepared, with the 2nd Panzer Division, considered an elite unit, comprised of 88 tanks and assault guns, well known for their combat prowess. Accompanying them was the veteran Panzer Division, boasting 57 tanks, alongside the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, which had a formidable 27,000 infantrymen. These units formed the core of the German assault force, each tasked with pressing the attack from different directions, aiming to converge upon Bastogne's vital roads and overwhelm the American defenders. Meanwhile, from the opposite direction, another key American formation, the 101st Airborne Division, famously known as the Screaming Eagles, raced against time and the Germans' schedule. These airborne troops had been resting in Rams, France, after enduring a grueling 72 days of combat in Holland. Their rest was abruptly shattered when orders came to mobilize once again. The soldiers had scant time to prepare. No winter clothing was available, and they had little information about what awaited them. In a rush, they grabbed their weapons and boarded trucks that would carry them into the chaos. On the night of December 17, at 9 o'clock in the evening, the temperature had plummeted to a bone-chilling 14 degrees Fahrenheit, casting a cold shadow over the dark landscape as the first trucks of the 101st Airborne began their relentless journey toward Bastogne. Among the many soldiers was Private Donald Burgett of the 56th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who vividly recalled every detail of that harrowing night. As the convoy moved forward, he observed countless columns of American troops retreating in the opposite direction, many of whom were visibly ill-equipped for the bitter cold and the imminent danger. Some soldiers had abandoned their weapons altogether, while others lacked helmets, exposing themselves to the perilous conditions. The retreating soldiers shouted intimidating warnings through the darkness, crying out, "Go back! Go back! They'll kill you all!" trying to dissuade the advancing troops. One terrified soldier, eyes wide with alarm and fear, seized Burgett's arm and desperately warned, "There are thousands of them, tigers, panthers, everything." His words conveyed the chaos and the formidable enemy presence that lay ahead. Burgett, however, pushed him away resolutely and reaffirmed their determination. They would not turn back. The convoy stretched for miles, a vast moving sea of over 380 trucks carrying men and supplies through the night, oblivious to what dangers awaited them. The troops had few reliable maps, and intelligence reports varied and even contradicted each other, leaving them to rely primarily on instinct and resolve. All they knew for certain was that their mission was to reach Bastogne before the Germans could establish control over the vital crossroads. The American division involved in this daring operation had an effective strength, comprising officers and enlisted men, totaling just shy of 12,000 troops. Their force included 4 infantry regiments, the 5,001st, the 5,002nd, and the 56th Parachute Infantry Regiment, as well as the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, complemented by 4 artillery battalions and various other support units necessary for sustained combat and logistics. The first elements of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment managed to reach the outskirts of Bastogne by approximately 11:30 p.m. on December 18, narrowly beating the main German force by only a few hours, a crucial edge that could influence the entire battle's outcome. Simultaneously, a specialized armored combat team from the 10th Armored Division, known as Team Des in the desperate and fierce struggle to defend Novel, the defenders faced a relentless tactical dilemma. They had to allow the enemy forces to approach dangerously close, risking a devastating flank attack in order to strike at them effectively from the side. This strategy required a delicate balance, proximity that was perilous yet necessary, to maximize their chances of inflicting damage on the advancing German units. Throughout the day, the battle for Novel intensified, becoming an unyielding contest of attrition and resilience. A small but remarkably determined force known as Team Deseri, consisting of only 15 Sherman tanks, stood their ground against the entire 2nd Panzer Division, an entire armored formation. Despite being numerically vastly inferior, they managed to hold their position for an arduous 51 hours, during which they destroyed an impressive 31 German tanks. Their steadfast resistance bought crucial time for the Allied forces, even as they faced the inevitable need to retreat under mounting pressure. During this intense engagement, Major Desri, the commanding officer of the team, was gravely wounded when a German shell struck his command post, a sacrifice that underscored the high stakes and the bravery exhibited on that front. This act of valor and strategic delay was instrumental in easing the pressure on other units and allowing them to regroup. As the calendar turned to December 20th, a significant change unfolded in Bastogne. A new leader arrived to take command of the besieged town. Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe, a seasoned artillery officer known for his unflappable composure under stress, reached Bastogne to assume temporary command of the distinguished 101st Airborne Division, while their division commander, Maxwell Taylor, was away in Washington. McAuliffe's reputation for calmness and steadiness in the face of chaos would become an invaluable asset in the difficult days ahead. Inside the command headquarters, a detailed situation map painted a stark picture. German forces encroached from three sides, tightening the noose around Bastonia's defenders. From the south and east, the 26th Folk Grenadier Division was steadily infiltrating, threatening to cut off the town's southern and eastern approaches. Meanwhile, the Panzer Division's forces, with their lurking lair nearby, advanced from the east, adding to the mounting threat. To the north, elements of the 2nd Panzer Division pressed inward, posing yet another peril from that direction. By noon on December 20th, the last remaining road into Bastogne, the vital highway leading to Neufchâteau, had been severed, effectively encircling the town and cutting off any possibility of resupply or reinforcement. In the midst of this dire situation, Captain Richard Winters, commander of Easy Company, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, positioned his men strategically along the perimeter in fortified foxholes. As night descended, the men could hear the distant rumble of German tanks moving in the darkness beyond their defensive line. The soldiers, aware that reinforcement or escape was impossible, prepared themselves by digging their foxholes deeper, utilizing helmets and their bare hands when the entrenching tools broke through the frozen ground. Outside, the temperature hovered dangerously close to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, a harsh winter that added yet another layer of suffering. Many men's feet were already turning black from frostbite, illustrating the brutal conditions under which they fought. Inside Bastogne, the civilian population, around 3,000 residents, sought refuge in cellars and underground shelters, desperately trying to escape the relentless artillery bombardment that systematically destroyed their town. Among those on the front lines was Renée Lemaire, a 29-year-old Belgian nurse whose tireless efforts in the aid station on Neufchâteau were critical in caring for both American and German wounded. Her dedication was extraordinary, but amidst the destruction and chaos, her resilience was to be short-lived, as she would ultimately not survive the siege. The defenders of Bastogne boasted an array of forces totaling approximately 18,000 soldiers. This formidable group included the brave men of the 101st Airborne Division, with an effective strength of around 11,840 personnel. Also present was Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, commanded by Colonel William Roberts, which contributed roughly 40 operational tanks in a force of around 2,800 men. Supporting these units were the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcat tanks, the All-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion, and various artillery and support units, all contributing to the town's tenuous defenses. Dawn on December 21st broke under bleak, nearly opaque skies. Visibility was less than 100 yards, and a thick fog blended with snow, forming a white, featureless shroud that made movement and coordination exceedingly difficult. The United States Army's meteorological report described these conditions as extremely adverse for any military operations, effectively hampering the efforts of the Allied forces. For the Germans, however, these weather conditions were a fortunate gift. The dense fog and snow grounded the Allied fighter bombers that had been relentlessly harassing amidst the bleak, icy wilderness where treacherous roads hampered movement. The harrowing realities of war were vividly evident. The men fighting on these frozen battlegrounds faced brutal conditions, with many succumbing to the cold long before medical help could reach them. Wounded soldiers, their bodies battered and frostbitten, often froze to death in the frigid environment, their suffering compounded by the inability to save them in time. Within the perimeter of Bastogne, supplies were rapidly dwindling, painting a dire picture of the logistical nightmare faced by the defenders. Ammunition reserves had been stretched dangerously thin, with the artillery crews now restricted to a mere 10 rounds per gun each day, a stark indicator of the critical shortages pressing upon them. Medical supplies had been almost entirely exhausted following the capture of their medical unit on December the 19th, forcing grim decisions about who could be treated and who would be left to succumb to their injuries or the cold. Morphine, once plentiful, was now a precious resource, rationed to be used only for the most severely wounded, often making the difference between suffering and a peaceful death. Food supplies had dwindled to a single meal per day, leaving the soldiers to survive on meager rations. Private First Class James Sims, serving with the 101st Airborne Division, later recounted their desperate plight. "We were drinking snow for water, and the man next to me in the foxhole had his feet frozen solid to his boots. Eventually, the medic had to cut them off, and his toes came away with them. He didn't even cry. He'd gone beyond feeling anything." The relentless cold and constant scarcity underscored the grim reality of their resistance, highlighting the profound toll exacted by the harsh winter and the limited supplies. Meanwhile, approximately 130 miles south of Bastogne, at the location known as Verdun, a starkly different scene was unfolding that same day, December the 19th. Inside a humble, cold and damp French military barracks, heated only by a single inefficient pot-bellied stove, a pivotal meeting was taking place among the Allied High Command. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had convened an emergency conference with his top generals, a gathering of the most influential military minds steering the Allied war effort. The room was crowded with icons of military leadership: Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, and Lieutenant General George S. Patton among them. The air was thick with tension as Major General Kenneth Strong, Eisenhower's chief of intelligence, concluded his briefing on the recent and alarming German breakthrough in the Allied lines. A profound silence followed, heavy with apprehension and concern about the gravity of the situation. Breaking this silence, Eisenhower spoke with conviction, trying to reframe the dire circumstances as a window of opportunity rather than impending disaster. His words carried a tone of strategic optimism, emphasizing resilience and resolve. He addressed the gathered commanders, asserting that this moment, despite its apparent crisis, was an opening for bold action rather than despair. "The present situation," Eisenhower declared, "must be seen as an opportunity for us, not a catastrophe." His tone was firm, encouraging, and infused with a sense of collective strength. Almost immediately, General Patton flashed a grin, a sign of his characteristic confidence and audacity. "Hell," he said with a mischievous smile, "let's have the guts to push all the way to Paris. That way we can really cut them off and crush them thoroughly." Eisenhower, however, adopted a more serious demeanor. Turning to George Patton, he asked with urgency and strategic intent, "George, I need you to attack northward. How quickly can you disengage from your current offensive and pivot toward Bastogne?" The response from Patton was astonishingly swift and confident. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours, he responded without hesitation. This proclamation stunned every officer present, eliciting expressions of disbelief. Even Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tadar, the senior air commander, amused, chuckled at the audacity of such an aggressive timetable. Moving an entire corps under winter conditions and across 100 meters of icy roads within only 2 days seemed impossible. Eisenhower's face flushed at the boldness of the claim, his concern evident. "Don't be fatuous, George," he warned. "If you attempt to do this too early, you won't have all 3 divisions fully prepared, and your attack might come apart in fragments, putting everything at risk of complete failure." But Patton was not merely boasting, he was well prepared. For the past 3 days, his meticulous operations officer, Colonel Oscar Coe, had been warning him about the increasing German buildup in the Ardennes region, which they now faced. Patton had already devised 3 different operational plans tailored specifically for this very contingency, pre-positioning fuel dumps, ammunition supplies, and medical units along the most likely routes of advance to ensure maximum flexibility and readiness. Calmly, Bastogne. General Eisenhower meticulously examined the map spread out before him, fully aware of the daunting challenge that lay ahead. The scale of the distance they needed to cover was truly staggering, stretching far beyond what seemed possible under the harshest conditions. The weather was nothing short of catastrophic. The skies were cloaked in thick, oppressive clouds, and the temperature plummeted to levels that could freeze bone. The roads, already treacherous, had transformed into slick, deadly sheets of ice, making movement hazardous for any vehicle or soldier attempting to traverse them. Despite these formidable obstacles, the imperative was clear. Bastogne, a critical strategic point, had to be liberated without delay. When could the operation commence? The answer was set for the morning of December 22nd. The orders were given unequivocally: do it. As General Patton concluded a crucial meeting, he reached for his telephone and dialed his headquarters using a prearranged code phrase, play ball. Sure, those two words, simple yet significant, initiated one of the most extraordinary military operations in history. Within a matter of hours, a colossal force of 133,000 military vehicles started moving in unison toward the north, transforming a vast, chaotic landscape into a moving battalion of determination. The entire Third Army, comprising approximately 250,000 soldiers, needed to be realigned swiftly and efficiently to meet this new and urgent objective. The logistical tasks involved in such a maneuver were nothing short of monumental. Supply depots carefully positioned in anticipation of an offensive into Germany had to be swiftly relocated. This meant repositioning vast quantities of supplies, weapons, and equipment across a war-torn terrain. Communication lines stretching for 20,000 miles of telephone wire had to be rerouted, often under perilous conditions. Artillery positions, strategically calculated for an attack in one direction, had to be entirely recalculated and repositioned to accommodate the new assault vector. Among the many personnel involved, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, received his orders precisely at 7 o'clock in the evening on December 19. His battalion was tasked with a formidable challenge: to cover a distance of 150 miles in just 19 hours amidst a raging blizzard. Abrams later recounted how the troops pushed through the night, driving with blackout lights to avoid detection. As he described, tank commanders stood watch in the chilling cold of their turrets, guiding drivers who struggled to see the road through the swirling snow and ice. Men, exhausted and cold, often found themselves nodding off while standing, only to be jolted awake by shaking hands or shouted commands. The logistical effort behind all this movement was staggering. Each Sherman tank, the backbone of the armored forces, consumed approximately 175 gallons of fuel for this grueling journey. To initiate the offensive, the division required about 50,000 gallons of fuel just to reach the starting line. Fuel trucks had to operate continuously, often slipping on icy roads into ditches, their drivers risking life and limb to keep supplies flowing. When a vehicle broke down or became immobilized, fuel was transferred by hand using 5-gallon jerry cans, a painstaking and hazardous task. Master Sergeant Frank Carousel from the 4th Armored Maintenance Company worked tirelessly for 72 hours straight, changing track blocks on tanks still moving into their designated positions. He vividly recalled how the cold had a brutal grip on their hands so frozen that, upon pulling away, skin often tore off. Despite this severe discomfort, no one stopped working. Every soldier understood the stakes. Those paratroopers and infantrymen waiting in Bastogne relied on their effort and bravery. They knew that the success of their operation depended on their relentless commitment, enduring the freezing cold and exhausting fatigue. Meanwhile, in Bastogne, the situation had grown increasingly dire. The fortified perimeter had shrunk to less than 16 miles, a shrinking boundary of safety amid the chaos. German artillery had meticulously zeroed in on every fortified position, threatening to obliterate what remained of the American defenses. Aid stations, overwhelmed by the surge of wounded soldiers, struggled to provide adequate care amid the mounting chaos. On the morning of December 22nd at precisely 11:30, 4 German officers approached the American lines under a white flag of truce. They were met by soldiers from Fox Company of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. The German delegation was composed of Major Wagner, representing the 47th Panzer Corps, Lieutenant Helmuth Henker from the Panzer Operations Section, and 2 enlisted men from the 9100 Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Major Vanner carried with him a typed ultimatum, presented on 2 sheets of paper, one in English and the other in German. The English version had been typed on an English typewriter, with German diacritical marks carefully added by hand, symbolizing the precision and formality of the message. Once brought to the American command, the scene unfolded with a full, commanding voice echoing in German, detailing the seemingly hopeless predicament faced by the American forces. The message vividly conveyed that the German artillery units were fully prepared and capable of obliterating the remaining American troops through relentless cannon fire. It emphasized that the only conceivable way to escape total annihilation was through surrender, presenting this option as the sole hope for survival amid the oncoming storm of destruction. Amid this tense moment, Colonel Moore sought guidance, asking outright what the appropriate response should be to such a dire ultimatum. The question hung in the air, revealing genuine uncertainty and the gravity of the situation. McAuliffe, feeling the weight of the decision, looked genuinely puzzled, unable to immediately formulate an answer. Before he could speak, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Card decided to interject, offering a witty yet defiant suggestion. He remarked with a hint of dry humor that the first reply McAuliffe had given was difficult to outperform, a clever nod to the gravity and absurdity of their predicament. McAuliffe, amused by the comment, chuckled and responded ambiguously, asking if Card meant they should reply with nuts, a colloquial expression implying resistance and stubbornness. The room erupted into a chorus of agreement, embracing the resilient spirit that such a reply embodied. With a quick, decisive gesture, McAuliffe sat down and carefully composed a concise yet historically legendary retort to the Germans. Simply, nuts. This single word became an iconic symbol of American defiance, a bold and unwavering rejection of the German demands in the face of imminent danger. When Colonel Joseph Harper was tasked with delivering this curt but powerful message to the waiting German officers, they were left dazed by its bluntness. The Germans, puzzled and perhaps slightly insulted, questioned its meaning. Nuts? What does that mean? Harper, unable to contain his amusement, decided to clarify with a bit of sarcasm, explaining that it meant, in essence, go to hell. Harper did not stop there. He issued a fierce proclamation, warning the Germans that if they dared to attack again, they would face the fierce resistance of every American soldier willing to fight. He boldly declared that they intended to kill any German soldier who attempted to breach their defenses and invade the city, leaving no room for doubt about their resolve. Major Wagner, a German officer, responded with a stiffening posture, asserting that in war, many Americans would be killed in the process. Harper's blunt reply was a clear message. "On your way, buddy," he said, with a tone teeming with defiance, and extended his wishes for good luck to the Germans, an unmistakable challenge to their resolve. Later, the commander of the 5th Panzer Army, General Hasso von Manteuffel, admitted with a mixture of surprise and begrudging respect that he had not expected the ultimatum to be sent at all. He revealed that a delegation from the Panzer Division had gone to Bastogne unapproved, seeking surrender, but it was rejected outright, as anyone with strategic sense would have anticipated. The German response to McAuliffe's unwavering reply was swift and brutal, exemplifying their ruthless approach to warfare. That very evening, the Luftwaffe launched its first significant bombing assault on Bastogne, unleashing a barrage that transformed the city into a nightmare. For the soldiers entrenched in foxholes and trenches, it was a harbinger of hell itself. Corporal Walter Gordon of Easy Company vividly described the chaos, how the earth trembled as if struck by an earthquake, how trees around them erupted into flames, and shrapnel tore through the air with ferocity, likened to the angry buzz of hornets. In the midst of the bombardment, the soldiers huddled close to the frozen ground, praying for survival. The biting cold worsened their plight, with temperatures plummeting to near 10 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the foxholes into icy traps. Men took turns sleeping in shifts, trying to prevent frostbite and hypothermia. They resorted to urinating in empty ration cans, as leaving their makeshift shelters was too dangerous due to sniper fire and the chilling cold. The threat was constant, and even brief exposure could be deadly. Food supplies during these dark times had become critically scarce. The official daily ration was a mere 1 kr ration, providing roughly 2,800 calories, far below the 4,000 needed to sustain men in such brutal, freezing conditions. The soldiers, desperate to stretch their rations, learned to utilize every resource. They carefully saved wax-coated cardboard from the ration boxes, knowing that it could burn long enough to heat a canteen of snow into drinkable water, a vital act of improvisation in their survival efforts. Technical Sergeant Donald Malarkey, resourceful and inventive, devised a particularly daring solution to their dire hunger. He and his comrades discovered that the hundreds of frozen German horses scattered around the city were still fresh, as they had. During that tragic event, Dozens of wounded soldiers and medical personnel found themselves trapped beneath the rubble of what had once been a bustling aid station. It was Corporal Kenneth Moore who had been outside when the devastating bomb struck. He vividly remembered hearing the explosion reverberate through the air and instinctively running toward the site of destruction. When he arrived, the aid station had been reduced to a jumble of rubble and debris, with the sounds of desperate voices emanating from beneath the wreckage. Men crying out for help, calling endlessly for their mothers in a voice filled with pain and fear. In a frantic and determined effort, rescuers used their bare hands to sift through the wreckage throughout the long night, pulling out bodies and desperately attempting to save those still alive. Among the casualties was Miss Lemaire, who had made the conscious choice to stay with the wounded who could not be moved, ultimately losing her life in the process. That single bombing claimed the lives of 30 American soldiers and also the Belgian nurse, who had become an emblem of hope for the injured. Her name was Augusta Chewy, a dedicated nurse of Congolese-Belgian descent, who, despite the chaos and destruction, continued to tend to the wounded for an unrelenting 30 hours following the attack. As Christmas Eve transitioned into Christmas Day, Patton's Third Army grappled with the harsh realities of winter, struggling against a fierce blizzard that slowed their progress. The military operation, which had begun on December the 22nd, was falling significantly behind schedule. Over the course of 3 days, the 4th Armored Division had advanced only a mere 7 miles, a sluggish pace that perplexed and frustrated the commanding officers. General Patton, known for his unconventional approach to warfare, had called upon his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill, on December the 22nd with an unusual request. "Chaplain, I want you to prepare a prayer for good weather," Patton instructed, looking for divine intervention to ease the hardships faced by his troops. "I'm weary of these soldiers having to battle through mud, floods, and freezing cold just as much as they are fighting the Germans. See if you can get God to work on our side." Colonel O'Neill hesitated, doubtful of the efficacy of such a request. "Sir, it's going to take a very thick rug for that kind of praying," he replied cautiously. Patton, undeterred, responded with characteristic firmness. "I don't care if it takes a flying carpet," he said. "I want you to draft a prayer for good weather." That prayer was then printed on 250,000 cards and distributed to every soldier within the Third Army, a symbolic act of faith and hope. The prayer itself beseeched divine mercy. "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee of thy great goodness to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle, whether by divine intervention or meteorological coincidence." Remarkably, on the dawn of December the 23rd, the weather broke in a most extraordinary way. Clear skies emerged for the first time in a week, with the sun piercing through the clouds in a display that seemed almost miraculous. After days of thick fog and relentless snow, visibility suddenly extended to 10 miles, an unprecedented sight in those conditions. Temperatures climbed above freezing for the first time during that period, a change that brought much-needed relief. Most importantly of all, the Allied air forces were finally able to take to the skies once again. At exactly 9:50 in the morning, the first Pathfinder aircraft appeared over Bastogne, dropping colored smoke to mark the designated drop zones for the upcoming supplies. By 11:50 in the morning, the sky was filled with a fleet of 241 C-47 transport planes, flying in perfect formation and creating a truly awe-inspiring spectacle. Sergeant Jack Agnew, a member of the Pathfinder team, vividly remembered the moment. "We released purple smoke to mark the drop zone, and then we heard it, the low rumble growing into a thunderous roar. The sky turned dark as aircraft flooded in. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen." The paratroopers in Bastogne erupted in cheers, their spirits lifted by the sight of help arriving. Men climbed out of their foxholes, waving their helmets triumphantly, many with tears streaming down their faces as they finally saw relief in the distance. For 7 days, they had endured isolation and hardship without any outside support. Now the sky was filled with aid and reinforcements. The first parachutes blossomed at 11:55 in the morning, and supplies began to rain down from the sky in a steady torrent. These included ammunition, medical supplies, food, warm blankets, and most critically, artillery shells necessary for their defense. Out of the 1,446 bundles dropped from the aircraft, an impressive 95% were successfully recovered, ensuring that the soldiers received essential. The logistics team at G4 meticulously coordinated the complex operation of recovery amidst chaos. Men sprinted through relentless artillery fire, desperately trying to seize and retrieve crucial supplies. I witnessed a young soldier, a private, struck by shrapnel. Despite the pain and bleeding streaming down his face, he rose swiftly to his feet, summoned his courage, and with determination, dragged a bundle of equipment to a safer cover. His bravery exemplified the relentless spirit of those fighting on the front lines. Meanwhile, the German forces were far from passive. They responded with deadly efficiency. Anti-aircraft guns strategically positioned around Bastogne opened fire with relentless precision, aiming to bring down the Allied aircraft. The C-47 transport planes, tasked with delivering vital supplies, had to fly straight and level at an altitude of only 1,000 feet to ensure accurate drops, making them sitting targets for enemy fire. These aircraft appeared vulnerable, almost defenseless, as they flew directly into the storm of concentrated artillery and anti-aircraft fire. By the 26th of December, the relentless airlift had transported over 1,020.7 tons of supplies via parachute drops and an additional 92.4 tons by glider. The most substantial airlift occurred on the same day, when an astonishing 289 planes took part in the massive Boston Run, delivering vital cargo under constant threat. Early on Christmas morning, precisely at 2:45 a.m., German artillery unleashed what would be the most intense barrage yet on Bastogne. For 2 full hours, relentless shells rained down upon American positions, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. As dawn approached, at 5:30 a.m., a formidable assault was launched by 18 Panzer Mark 35 tanks of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, alongside infantry units clad in white camouflage to blend into the snow-covered terrain. Leading this attack was Lieutenant Colonel Wolfgang Mahler, whose orders from General Kokot were clear and uncompromising. Bastogne had to fall today, fulfilling the Führer's wish for a victory during Christmas. The German tanks smashed through the initial line of defenses held by Company A of the 327th Glider Infantry. Private First Class Kenneth Hendris, positioned in the second line, watched helplessly as the ground trembled beneath the iron feet of the advancing machines. At dawn, the tanks appeared as terrifying monsters emerging from the shadows. While our bazooka rounds bounced harmlessly off their thick armor, the American defenders had anticipated such an assault and had hidden their tank destroyers carefully around the ruins of bombed-out buildings. As the German tanks rolled past, these hidden ambush units struck from the flanks with precise fire. Sergeant Bill Harper commanded one of the M18 Hellcats of the 75th Tank Destroyer Battalion. We waited patiently as they passed, then unleashed our attack from behind, targeting the vulnerable rear armor where it was thinnest. My gunner, Corporal Johnson, proved exceptional, firing 5 shots with deadly accuracy and claiming 3 kills. By 10 o'clock in the morning, all 18 German tanks had been destroyed, reduced to burning wrecks amid the snow. The battleground was strewn with nearly 400 German soldiers, dead or wounded, their bodies lying cold in the frosty landscape. A captured German officer, in a moment of surrender and despair, told his interrogators, "Your defense was magnificent. We knew after this morning we could not take Bastogne." In the midst of these fierce battles, General McAuliffe addressed his troops with a Christmas message, recounting the German surrender demand and his resolute reply. He affirmed, "We have stopped cold everything that has been thrown at us from the north, east, south, and west," emphasizing the resilience and strength of the American forces. On the afternoon of December 26th, at 4 o'clock, Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding the Sherman tank named Cobra King of the 37th Tank Battalion, peered through his periscope toward the Belgian village of Assinanoa, located a mere 4 miles from Bastogne. Over the past 4 days, the 4th Armored Division had been engaged in a brutal fight, pushing forward through well-entrenched German positions, inch by bloody inch. The final assault was set to begin at 2:20 p.m., with Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanding the battalion to move forward while simultaneously calling for maximum artillery support. His voice crackled over the radio. "I want every gun you've got." Within minutes, more than 2,340 artillery rounds rained down upon the German positions encircling Assinanoa. Bogus remembered the moment vividly, the deafening roar of the artillery, the sight of German troops sprinting from their foxholes in frantic retreat as the shells walked through their defenses. Once the devastating barrage subsided, Abrams issued the next command, signaling the beginning of the final push to clear the enemy from this strategic point. Driving closer to Bastonia's outskirts and inching the battle toward its decisive phase, "Move out!" With unwavering determination, our forces surged forward at maximum speed, unleashing a relentless barrage of fire from every weapon at our disposal. Private James Hendress, serving as the bow gunner aboard the Cobra King tank, vividly recalled the ferocious breakthrough. "We tore through that town as effortlessly as a hot knife slices through butter, cutting a swathe of destruction with brutal efficiency." German soldiers responded with a hail of gunfire from windows, doorways, and every conceivable vantage point, their bullets ricocheting through the air in futile attempts to halt our advance. Our main armament, the formidable 75mm gun, swung swiftly from side to side, unleashing direct, point-blank shots into the facades of buildings, leveling walls and rifles alike in a storm of destruction. At precisely 4:50 in the afternoon, Cobra King crested a small rise, and in that moment, Bogus looked ahead and saw a line of American soldiers. They were engineers from the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion, the outermost layer of Bastonia's formidable defensive perimeter. Their voices rang out in a cheerful challenge. "Come on in!" they shouted. "You're the first tanks we've seen in 10 days." The significance was clear. The long and grueling siege was finally over. Bogus quickly relayed this vital information by radio to General Abrams, confirming contact with friendly forces. The siege was broken, yet the victory had come at a terrible cost. The 37th Tank Battalion had suffered losses totaling 5 soldiers killed in action, 22 wounded, and 5 missing in action during the relentless assault. The 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion had also paid heavily, with 30 of their men killed and 180 wounded. Despite the heavy casualties, the corridor that had been only 400 yards wide was now open, providing the Allied forces a vital tactical route. News of the breakthrough spread through Bastonia like wildfire, igniting a wave of jubilation among the troops and civilians alike. Men who had been conserving every precious round of ammunition suddenly fired entire clips into the air in celebration. Wounded soldiers in the aid stations cheered despite their pain, their spirits lifted by the sight of hope and progress. General McAuliffe, known for his composed demeanor, simply acknowledged the victory with a calm remark. "We're glad to see you, boys." But for the German defenders, the psychological blow was devastating, leaving a deep scar on their morale. In his diary, Major General Kokot wrote somberly about the situation, stating, "The relief of Bastonia is a disaster, not just tactically, but morally as well. Our soldiers have lost faith in the possibility of victory. They have witnessed American resolve and determination firsthand, and it has shattered their spirit." Oberstleutnant Kaufmann, a seasoned officer of the Panzer Division, was more blunt and direct in his assessment. He acknowledged that they had thrown everything they possessed at Bastonia, their best troops, their last reserves of tanks, and their dwindling supplies of ammunition. Yet despite their efforts, the defenders clung stubbornly to their position. When the Germans demanded the surrender of Bastonia, the defenders responded with defiance and laughter. Their simple, defiant word, "nuts," did more damage to the German morale than 1,000 bombs raining down from the sky. It was a symbol of unyielding resistance, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the defenders. Initially, the defenders had been approximately 18,000 men strong, determined to hold the city at all costs. However, by December 26th, the toll of the fighting became painfully clear. From December 19th to January 6th, the 37th Airborne Division had suffered a total of 341 soldiers killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 reported missing. The Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division endured roughly 500 casualties, a staggering testament to the ferocity of the combat. Meanwhile, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion managed to destroy 108 German armored vehicles, while losing only 17 of their Hellcat tanks, a remarkable ratio of efficiency. German losses in the vicinity of Bastogne were catastrophic. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division suffered casualties exceeding 60%, decimating their fighting strength. Panzer Lehr, a key strategic point, lost 42 tanks in the intense fighting. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had opted to bypass Bastogne and march toward the Moose River, found itself stranded and ultimately destroyed. They ran out of fuel just 4 miles from the river, their attempt to outflank the city thwarted by the swift and relentless American counterattack, which was carried out by the 2nd Armored Division. On December 27, the weather cleared up dramatically, revealing the full might of the Allied air power. From December 23rd through the 27th, Allied aircraft flew over a total of 34,000 sorties, unleashing a relentless aerial assault on German positions. On the battlefield, a tactic known as tank plinking was frequently employed during the intense fighting days. This involved engaging enemy vehicles with precision strikes, often without the Germans possessing any air cover to defend against such attacks. Our tactics would see our aircraft diving from altitudes of approximately 8,000 feet, releasing their rockets at roughly 2,000 feet above the ground, and then climbing away swiftly to avoid retaliation. Below, the landscape was often consumed by fire. German military vehicles and supply convoys would burn for miles in the aftermath of these assaults, creating a scene of widespread destruction and chaos. The most devastating air raid occurred on the 26th of December, when a massive force of nearly 300 Royal Air Force Lancaster bombers deployed a staggering 1,140 tons of bombs on German positions encircling the region near St. V. The impact was crippling. Every road within a radius of 3 kilometers was rendered impassable, buried under rubble and debris, effectively isolating the enemy forces and sealing their fate in that sector. Amidst the destruction, Unteroffizier Hans Barons of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division survived the onslaught. The earth beneath him erupted in chaos. Buildings disintegrated into dust and splinters, and entire groups of men seemed to vanish into thin air, vaporized by the ferocity of the bombing. When the bombardment finally ceased, I emerged from my shelter and was greeted by a landscape that resembled a foreboding moonscape. Craters, shattered structures, and a silence broken only by distant fires smoldering in the ruins. In the aftermath of this fierce assault, General McAuliffe made a point to specifically acknowledge the crucial role played by the 19th Tactical Air Command. He expressed his profound gratitude, stating that without their splendid cooperation, it would have been impossible for the defenders to hold their positions against the relentless German offensive. Throughout the siege, an extraordinary transformation was quietly underway within the German forces, a psychological shift that Allied intelligence would not fully comprehend until after the war had concluded. Initially, German soldiers had entered their campaign heavily influenced by propaganda, which painted the Americans as weak, spoiled, and prone to retreat at the first sign of serious combat. These illusions, however, were completely shattered at Bastogne. A poignant testament to this change comes from Gerrit Wilhelm Hoffmann of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, who wrote a letter to his wife on December 24th. This letter was later discovered on his body, offering a raw and revealing glimpse into his experiences. Hoffmann admitted that the Americans were not at all what they had been told. As fierce, relentless fighters, they fought with the tenacity of devils. He recounted witnessing a single American machine gun crew hold off an entire company for 3 hours, a feat that defied expectations and exemplified their fighting spirit. Similarly, Major Jan Krag of the Panzer Lehr Division was captured on December 27. During his interrogation, he stated with conviction that the Germans had been defeated not because of superior numbers or weaponry, but because of the indomitable spirit of the American soldiers. Krag's words encapsulated a fundamental truth. At Bastogne, the Germans learned that their adversaries were true warriors, fighting with an intensity and resolve that commanded respect. While the defense of Bastogne captured headlines and became a symbol of resilience, the operation led by General Patton to relieve the besieged city represented an even more profound revolution in operational warfare. The sheer scale and efficiency of this maneuver remained staggering. Over a span of just 72 hours, Patton's Third Army managed to move an astonishing 250,000 men across more than 100 miles of icy, snow-covered roads. This formidable logistical feat also involved the meticulous repositioning of 133,000 vehicles, without a single significant traffic jam disrupting the operation. Further, they laid 20,000 meters of telephone wire to maintain communications, established 70 new ammunition supply points, created 40 fuel dumps containing 500,000 gallons of gasoline, and set up 20 field hospitals to provide medical care to the wounded. In addition, they delivered 4,000 tons of ammunition, distributed 62,000 maps to troops for navigation, and ensured continuous mobility and supply for the advancing forces. Colonel Oscar Coe, who served as Patton's G2 intelligence officer, later reflected on this remarkable achievement, stating that what Patton and his staff accomplished during those 3 days should have been deemed impossible. His calculations indicated that it would typically take at least 6 days to plan and execute such a complex movement, underscoring the extraordinary level of preparedness and coordination involved. The secret to this success lay fundamentally in meticulous preparation. Unknown to many, General Patton had been conducting detailed war games for 2 weeks leading up to the maneuver, specifically simulating the exact scenario they ultimately faced. When other senior commanders dismissed the possibility of a German offensive, Patton had issued orders for his staff to prepare comprehensive contingency plans, ensuring that his forces could respond rapidly and effectively. During a grueling 10-day period, a staggering total of approximately 167 surgical procedures were carried out, many of which were performed without the benefit of proper anesthetic in the harshest conditions. At times, medical teams had to operate by the flickering light of a single candle when their generators failed amidst continuous artillery bombardments, which was a constant threat to both the wounded and the medical personnel. When morphine supplies were exhausted, resourcefulness took over, and Belgian cognac was used as an improvised painkiller to ease the suffering of the injured. Among the medical personnel, Technical Sergeant Eugene Rowe of Easy Company stood out for his extraordinary dedication. He attended to over 200 wounded soldiers during the siege, often risking his own safety by crawling through heavy artillery fire to reach the casualties. Remarkably, Sergeant Rowe carried no weapons, only his medical supplies, embodying the selfless spirit of a true medic committed solely to saving lives. The valiant defense of Bastogne and the subsequent relief operation, led by General George Patton, had repercussions that resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield. Hitler's major offensive aimed at splitting the Allied forces and recapturing the crucial port of Antwerp was effectively halted, marking a decisive turning point in the Western Front. After the battle, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who was the senior German commander in the Western Theater, provided a candid assessment during his post-war interrogation, stating, "Bastogne became the graveyard of the Ardennes offensive. We needed to secure that vital road junction by December 16th. When the Americans held out for an entire week and then received reinforcements, it became clear that our offensive had failed. The Germans had committed their entire strategic reserve, an entire 25 divisions, to the attack. Over the course of 6 weeks of intense and brutal combat, they suffered devastating losses, with casualties estimated to be between 81 and 82 1,000 and 98,000 men. They also lost more than 600 tanks and assault guns, along with around 1,000 aircraft, a toll that Germany could never replenish. The Americans also paid a heavy price, with approximately 75,000 losses among their ranks, including those killed, wounded, or listed as missing, with around 19,000 confirmed killed in action. Yet the United States possessed the capacity to replace these losses with remarkable efficiency. By January of 1945, new American divisions were arriving from across the Atlantic at a rate of roughly 1 division per week, bolstering the Allied forces. More critically, the fierce fighting had drained Germany's last reserves. By the time the Soviet Union launched its winter offensive on January 12th of that same year, Germany found itself without the strategic reserves needed to mount a significant eastward defense. Consequently, essentially, the entire path to Berlin was laid open for the advancing Soviet armies. The Battle of Bastogne has since grown into a legend that endures to this day. The famous "nuts" reply, originating from a desperate American soldier's rejection of a German demand for surrender, became a symbol of American defiance and resilience, cementing its place in military folklore. General Patton's daring relief march is now studied worldwide as a textbook example of tactical ingenuity and determination under seemingly impossible circumstances. The legacy of this fierce engagement persisted long after the battle, culminating in a poignant reunion in December 1984, where veterans from both sides, former enemies, gathered to commemorate the 40th anniversary of their struggle. During this commemoration, General McAuliffe, then 87 years old, delivered a moving keynote speech, emphasizing that their fight was not for conquest, but for the fundamental ideals of freedom. He stressed that their actions were driven by duty, not hatred, and that after the fighting, they actively contributed to the reconstruction of what war had torn apart. Hans Detmer, a former German helper from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, who returned for the anniversary, expressed a profound sentiment. "I came here in 1944 as a conqueror. Now I return as a friend. The Americans we fought showed us the true meaning of democracy, not weakness, but strength." Today, the Martyrs Memorial stands prominently on a hill overlooking Bastogne. This star-shaped monument commemorates the 56,189 American soldiers who lost their lives during the Battle of the Bulge. Every year on the 16th of December, precisely at the dawn hour of 5:30 in the morning, the moment when the German offensive was officially launched, bells ring across the town of Bastogne in solemn remembrance. In the town square, a preserved Sherman tank from the 11th Armored Division, nicknamed Barracuda, is displayed. Children play atop it, clambering over the very armor that once liberated their grandparents and symbolized American resilience and sacrifice. Vincent Speranza, a paratrooper known for bringing beer to wounded soldiers during the battle, returned countless times to Bastogne to pay homage, ensuring that the memory of those days and the sacrifices made would never fade. Before the end of his life, Tonya was remembered with deep respect and affection by the community. The local brewery, in a gesture of homage, crafted a special Airborne beer that bore his name, celebrating his legacy. In his final visit in the year 2019, at the venerable age of 96, he lifted a glass in a toast that resonated with meaning and remembrance. His words echoed through the room. "To the boys who didn't come home, to those who never forgot, to the pursuit of freedom." Those simple yet profound words captured the essence of his lifelong dedication to liberty and sacrifice. The historical account of the Bastogne operation remains one of astonishing magnitude, filled with remarkable figures that underscore the scale and intensity of the conflict. Initially, the American forces stationed in Bastogne numbered around 18,000 soldiers, a significant force by any measure, with over 11,800 of those being members of the distinguished 101st Airborne Division. Alongside them, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division contributed a formidable armor contingent, deploying nearly 40 tanks ready for combat on the front lines. The total American casualties sustained during the fierce fighting in Bastogne are estimated to have been approximately 4,500 soldiers, a sobering reminder of the heavy toll exacted in this pivotal battle. Meanwhile, the German forces committed to the Bastogne confrontation began with an initial strength ranging between 25,000 to 30,000 troops and eventually swelled to about 55,000 as the battle dragged on. The German casualties suffered in the vicinity of Bastogne were considerable, with reports indicating over 15,000 men lost. Their armored units also sustained heavy losses, with more than 100 tanks destroyed or rendered inoperative. In response to the dire situation, General George S. Patton's relief force, comprising approximately 250,000 men, pivoted swiftly northward to reinforce the beleaguered defenders. An extraordinary movement unfolded as over 133,000 vehicles advanced, covering more than 100 miles through the bitter winter landscape, a feat that remains celebrated for its strategic brilliance. This rapid and decisive breakthrough was achieved in just 5 days, a testament to the resilience and tactical prowess of the Allied forces. The logistical effort supporting this push was equally impressive. Air operations delivered roughly 1,200 tons of supplies with a total of 961 sorties flown using the famous C-47 Dakota aircraft. On December the 23rd alone, more than 100 aircraft participated in the airdrop missions. The success rate of these airborne resupply missions was approximately 95%, demonstrating remarkable precision and coordination under challenging conditions. For 56 hours straight, the weather remained brutally cold, with temperatures dropping to approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit and visibility plummeting to less than 100 yards from December the 19th through the 22nd. It wasn't until December the 23rd that clear weather returned, allowing the final phases of the operation to unfold with less hindrance. The significance of this victory was recognized internationally. In January of 1945, Winston Churchill addressed the British Parliament and declared, "This battle, undoubtedly the greatest fought by the American forces during the war, will be remembered as one of the most illustrious victories in American military history." Similarly, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery openly acknowledged the valor of the American soldiers, stating, "The fighters at Bastogne authored one of the most heroic chapters in military annals. Their courage and determination will be honored and celebrated as long as mankind recognizes the virtues of bravery." Perhaps the most poignant tribute, however, came from an unlikely source. Heinrich von Lüttwitz, a former general of the German Wehrmacht whose 47th Panzer Corps had unsuccessfully encircled Bastogne, visited the battlefield memorial in '54. As he stood before it, he saluted and spoke words that reflected the mutual respect born from fierce combat. "They were magnificent enemies," he said, "who became better friends. They fought not for conquest but for principle. For that reason alone, they deserved to prevail." The lessons learned by the German forces that had once mocked the Americans trapped at Bastogne proved to be profound and enduring. During those freezing December days of 1944, they came to understand a fundamental truth, that free men, fighting resolutely for each other, possess an unwavering strength surpassing even the most formidable armies fighting for domination or conquest. They discovered that sheer determination and unity could defy numerical superiority. They realized that when democracy faces its most severe tests, it responds with a resilience and a force that tyranny can never match. The successful relief and defense of Bastogne stand as undeniable proof that when America's cherished freedoms are at stake, they will always attract passionate defenders. In the winter of 1944, those courageous defenders bore the insignia of the Screaming Eagle, of the 101st Airborne Division, and the triangle symbol of General Patton's Third Army. They were young men, teenagers, coming from diverse corners of the United States. Farms in Iowa, tenements in New York, ranches in that unwavering resolve defined the very essence of Bastogne's character. It embodied the indomitable spirit that resisted tyranny in all its forms. This was the same resilient spirit that sent Patton's mighty tanks crashing through icy snowdrifts, carving a path of relentless advance through the harshest of winter landscapes. When the stakes were highest, when the very concept of freedom seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse, those defending Bastogne responded with a single, resolute word that would be remembered long after: nuts. This simple yet powerful expression silenced the derisive jeers of the enemy, their mockery fading away into the cold, unforgiving snow that blanketed Bastogne. The echoes of their ridicule were drowned out by the thunderous roar of Patton's armored units, pounding forward with unstoppable force. At the same time, it was the unwavering determination of the surrounded paratroopers who refused to surrender, standing their ground against overwhelming odds, that truly exemplified grit and courage. Over time, the initial contempt that the enemy held was replaced by a deep sense of respect, then admiration, and ultimately genuine friendship. Bastogne's fortress of democracy had stood firm against the onslaught. The victorious arsenal of liberty had prevailed, ensuring that the future of a free world was forever safeguarded. The triumph was not merely a military victory, but a reaffirmation of the enduring human spirit that refuses to yield, even in the face of insurmountable challenges.